Okay, so what if I told you that competition is actually for losers?
Well, that's certainly one way to start.
Right. I mean, what if having a really rigid, objectively, quote unquote, bad plan is infinitely better than being this agile, flexible startup?
Yeah, sounds completely backward.
And what if I said that if you want to create real, lasting value in this world, your ultimate goal shouldn't be to disrupt a market, but to become an absolute unapologetic monopoly?
I mean, it completely shatters the whole mythology we've built around Silicon Valley, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Because we are all raised on this idea that capitalism is just synonymous with competition. That progress is just this chaotic evolutionary process where the best ideas just naturally win out.
Yeah, the invisible hand and all that.
Right. But when you examine the actual mechanics of how the future is built, that narrative just falls apart.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are tearing down that entire mythology.
It's about time.
We are diving into the core concepts from Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. And we're going to look at historical data, market structures, and, the really spectacular boons and busts of the last few decades.
Yeah, there's a lot of data to unpack there.
So our mission for this deep dive is to completely reprogram how you think about innovation and success. We're separating the glamorous PR of the tech world from the harsh but highly profitable realities of what actually moves humanity forward.
Because, the baseline truth we just have to accept right up front is that progress is not automatic.
Right.
The future doesn't just happen because time passes. The future only happens if someone actually engineers it.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we want to understand how to build the future, we first really need to define what the future actually means.
Yeah, we need a framework.
And the framework for this starts with a highly uncomfortable interview question that Thiel is famous for asking.
Oh, this question is brutal.
It really is. It goes like this. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
So if you're listening right now, just pause and seriously think about how you would answer that in a high-stakes job interview.
It sounds deceptively simple.
It sounds simple, but it is agonizingly difficult. Intellectually, it's hard because the entire foundation of our educational system is based on consensus.
Yeah, totally.
From kindergarten all the way through college, you are rewarded for finding and repeating the agreed-upon right answer.
Right. You get an A when you write down the exact thing the teacher already knows to be true. You definitely don't get an A for challenging the fundamental premise of the textbook.
Exactly. And psychologically, the question might be even harder.
Because we want people to like us.
Yeah. Answering it honestly requires the courage to say something you know for a fact will make you unpopular in the room. We're social creatures. We hate being ostracized.
For sure.
So brilliant thinking is rare, but the courage to stand completely alone is even rarer than genius.
And when people do try to answer it, they almost always fall into this trap. They'll say something like, our educational system is broken and urgently needs to be fixed.
Which everyone agrees with.
Right. Or they'll say America is exceptional, or they'll pick a side on a theological debate like there is no God.
But those aren't actual answers to the prompt. Those are just familiar debates.
Right.
Saying the education system is broken might be true, but almost everyone already agrees with that statement. So it's safe. It's a comfortable complaint.
So what does a good answer look like?
A genuinely good answer to this question requires a very specific structure. It has to be, most people believe in X, but the truth is the exact opposite of X.
Okay, so how does this contrarian question connect to defining the future? Well, the future isn't just tomorrow or next year. The future is defined as a time when the world looks fundamentally different from today.
Yeah, it's about change.
If nothing in our society changes for 100 years, then the future is 100 years away. But if things change radically in the next 10 years, well, the future's right around the corner. And progress, which is the engine that gets us to that different world, only takes two paths, 0 to 1 and 1 to n.
This is the critical framework for the whole deep dive.
Yeah.
So horizontal or extensive progress is going from 1 to n.
Meaning?
Meaning you take something that already works and you copy it. It's highly visible because it's already around us everywhere.
So it's like a known quantity.
Right. Think of a typewriter. If you have a working typewriter and you build a factory to stamp out 100 identical typewriters, you have made horizontal progress.
You went from 1 to n.
Precisely.
Right.
But vertical or intensive progress means doing something completely unprecedented, going from 0 to 1.
Okay.
So if you have a typewriter and you invent a digital word processor, you've made vertical progress. It's incredibly difficult to visualize because it requires imagining something that literally doesn't exist yet.
So 1 to N is like realizing a drive-through burger joint is profitable and then franchising it to 1,000 locations. You know the recipe, you know the unit economics, you've just hit copy-paste.
Exactly.
But 0 to 1 is inventing the concept of the fast food supply chain entirely from scratch.
Yes. And if we zoom out from burgers to the macroeconomic level, the single word for horizontal one-on progress is globalization.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, globalization is just taking things that work in one place, which is usually the developed West, and deploying them everywhere else. China's miraculous growth over the last few decades is actually the ultimate one-to-one success story.
Because they just copied the playbook.
Right, their macroeconomic plan was to straightforwardly copy everything that worked in the developed world. They built 19th century railroads, they installed 20th century air conditioning, they mapped out entire city grids based on Western models.
I mean, they might skip a few intermediate steps, right? Like going straight to mobile networks instead of laying millions of miles of copper landlines.
Sure, leapfrogging happens, but the fundamental act is still copying an existing model.
So if 1 to N is globalization, what is 0 to 1?
The single word for vertical, 0 to 1 progress, is technology.
And we have this habit of equating the word technology exclusively with computers or software.
Yeah, which is too narrow. Properly understood, any new and fundamentally better way of doing things is a technology.
This brings us back to Thiel's own answer to that contrarian interview question. His answer is that most people think the future of the world will be defined by globalization. But the truth is that technology matters vastly more.
And that is a profound statement.
I want to stop here because the math behind this claim is terrifying. It completely reframes how we look at the developing world.
It really is just basic environmental arithmetic. Let's look at globalization without technology.
Yeah.
If China doubles its energy production over the next 2 decades, using the exact same coal and combustion methods it uses today, it doubles its air pollution.
Which is already severe.
Right. Now imagine India. If hundreds of millions of Indian households suddenly achieved the exact same standard of living that Americans enjoy today, driving the same gasoline cars, eating the same resource-intensive diets, using the same manufacturing processes.
It wouldn't be a utopia.
No, the result isn't global wealth, it's a catastrophic depletion of resources.
It's not just about everyone running the same race to prosperity. It's about the engine driving the runners. If India and China plug into the exact same 20th century combustion engine the West used, we don't get global wealth. We just run out of oxygen.
The engine just melts down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Spreading old ways of creating wealth around the globe is mathematically unsustainable in a world of scarce resources. Globalization, without 0 to 1 technological innovation, leads straight to resource wars and environmental collapse.
We literally require miracles to survive.
And humans are the only species capable of working miracles. We don't just adapt to our environment, we rewrite the rules of the world.
We engineer it.
Right. But if 0 to 1 technology is so existentially essential for our survival, why is the modern business world so terrified of it?
That is the big question.
I mean, why is every startup pitch deck just, we are the Uber for dog walking, or we are a slightly cheaper enterprise software solution? Why are we so obsessed with safe, incremental copying?
To understand the extreme risk aversion of modern business, we really have to perform a sort of macroeconomic psychoanalysis.
Oh, like that.
We have to look at the massive collective trauma of the late 1990s and the dot-com crash.
It's funny, culturally, we look back at the 90s with these intense rose-tinted glasses. We think of the booming stock market, the end of the Cold War, the advent of the web. It feels like this era of supreme confidence.
It really does look that way on the surface. But underneath the pop culture surface, the 1990s were actually gripped by profound anxiety.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The decade started with a brutal U.S. recession. Manufacturing jobs were bleeding overseas, which fueled immense political populism. I mean, remember Ross Perot taking nearly 20% of the vote in 1992?
Yeah, just by playing on the anxiety of jobs flowing to Mexico.
Exactly. And internationally, you had images of American soldiers being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu on cable news. The cultural zeitgeist wasn't cheerful optimism. It was nirvana, grunge music, and heroin chic.
It was a deeply pessimistic, alienated era.
It was. And the global economic picture was even worse. The quote-unquote old economy was fracturing. In 1997, the East Asian financial crisis brought tiger economies like Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea to their knees.
And that contagion spread, right?
Fast. In August 1998, Russia completely defaulted on its debt and devalued the ruble. This was terrifying. You have a country with 10,000 nuclear warheads and absolutely no money to pay its military.
Wow, that is terrifying.
The panic was so severe it triggered the collapse of long-term capital management, which was this utterly massive U.S. hedge fund run by Nobel laureates.
Right, the Fed had to get involved.
The Federal Reserve had to step in and orchestrate a multi-billion-dollar bailout just to prevent a systemic collapse of the global financial system.
So globalization was failing. The old ways of making money were imploding.
Yes. And that is the exact context in which the internet boom exploded in late 1998. The dot-com bubble wasn't just a spontaneous outbreak of greed.
What was it then?
It functioned as an indirect psychological proof. Since nothing else in the old economy was working, the new economy of the internet absolutely had to be the way forward. People desperately needed a miracle, so they essentially willed one into existence.
And they leaned into it with a level of mania that is just hard to comprehend today. By 1999, rationality was totally detached from reality.
Completely detached.
We're talking about paper millionaires racking up $1,000 dinner bills in Silicon Valley and paying the restaurant with shares of their pre-revenue startup stock.
And the restaurants were accepting it.
Which is insane. There's this famous anecdote about a 40-year-old grad student running 6 different companies simultaneously.
Yeah.
In a sane world, that is a massive red flag for incompetence and lack of focus.
Right, but in 1999, venture capitalists viewed it as a brilliant, diversified strategy.
Adding a .com to a company's name could double its valuation overnight, regardless of its actual business model.
It was pure mania. And this was the chaotic crucible in which PayPal was fighting for its life.
The PayPal survival story is the perfect lens for this era because their strategy sounds like absolute madness.
It really does.
They had built this email payment product. But a payment network is totally useless if nobody is on it. They needed a critical mass of at least 1 million users just to make the network viable.
Right.
So they tried traditional advertising, but it was too expensive and slow. They tried doing deals with big banks, but the bureaucracy just killed the momentum. So what do? They literally bought their users.
They paid people $10 to sign up and another $10 every time they referred a friend.
I mean, stop and think about the accounting on that. You are paying people to be your customers,
Yes.
generating zero immediate revenue and creating an exponentially growing cost structure. Your burn rate is basically a rocket ship heading straight into the ground.
From a traditional business perspective, it is suicidal. But it was 0-to-1 vision. They modeled out that if they could capture a massive monopolistic user base, they could eventually impose a small fee on transactions and turn the entire network profitable.
But they were racing against a ticking clock.
Exactly, because they knew the broader market was a bubble that was inevitably going to pop.
The timing is what makes this legendary. In February 2000, the Wall Street Journal ran a glowing feature on PayPal's viral exponential growth. And at the end of the article, the journalist threw out a totally speculative, back-of-the-envelope valuation, saying the company was maybe worth $500 million.
Just a guess by a reporter.
Right. And PayPal took that newspaper clipping, literally used the article as their prospectus to convince investors to hand over $100 million in a massive funding round.
The frenzy was so intense that one South Korean investment firm wired them $5 million without even negotiating a valuation or signing a single legal document.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and when PayPal tried to return the money, the firm refused to tell them where to send it.
That is wild. And they closed that $100 million round in March 2000. Mere weeks before the NASDAQ peaked to 5,048 and then spectacularly collapsed. The bottom completely fell out.
It was a bloodbath.
By October 2002, the market had cratered to 11,114. Trillions of dollars in wealth just evaporated.
And that crash wasn't just treated as a normal market correction. It was internalized by the business world as a divine judgment against the hubris of technological optimism.
Like they were being punished.
Exactly. The culture decided that grand 0-to-1 visions were inherently fraudulent and dangerous. And out of that trauma, the tech industry adopted 4 strict lessons that became absolute gospel.
The 4 dogmas.
Right. The problem is, these 4 dogmas of modern innovation are completely wrong.
Let's break these dogmas down because they still govern how most people think about business today. Dogma number 1. Small, incremental steps are the only safe path forward. Because anyone claiming to build something massive is probably a huckster.
Right. And dogma number 2. Stay lean and flexible. In the 90s, companies had massive, rigid, multi-year plans that failed. So the overcorrection was to treat entrepreneurship as agnostic experimentation.
So just wing it.
Basically, you don't know what the market wants, so you just iterate your way to success. The whole lean startup methodology.
Let me push back on that a bit,
Yeah.
because the lean startup methodology is universally praised today. Sounds like common sense. If you don't know what customers want, shouldn't you be flexible? Doesn't a rigid, inflexible plan just drive you off a cliff faster if your initial assumptions are wrong?
That is exactly the conventional defense, but it's deeply flawed. The contrarian truth here is that a bad plan is actually vastly superior to no plan at all.
How so?
If you are just reacting to customer feedback and endlessly pivoting, you are treating business like biological evolution. You are hoping that random mutations and market selection will somehow magically design a breakthrough product.
Like throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Exactly. But Darwinism is a terrible way to build a company. Going from 0 to 1 requires intelligent design. You need a definite, bold plan for a specific future. It is far better to risk boldness than to guarantee triviality through endless micro-iterations.
Wow. Okay, dogma number 3, improve on the competition. The lesson from the crash was, don't try to create a brand new market prematurely.
Oh.
Wait for a market to exist, then enter it and just do things a little better or cheaper than the incumbents.
Which is just a recipe for slow death. The counter-principle to this is one of the most vital concepts for anyone building a business, and it's this: competitive markets destroy profits.
So simple, but so true.
If you entered an existing, highly competitive market, your margins will bleed out to zero.
And dogma number 4, focus on product, not sales.
Yeah.
In the 90s bubble, companies blew millions on Super Bowl ads for websites that literally didn't work. So the backlash created this belief that if your product is truly good, it will sell itself.
Yeah, that if it needs advertising, it must be inherently flawed, which completely ignores human behavior. The contrarian truth is that sales and distribution matter just as much as the product itself. If you invent a miracle but have no mechanism to deliver it to people, it's absolutely worthless.
So we just overcorrected on all 4 fronts.
The tech industry overcorrected massively. Yes, the peak of the dot-com mania in March 2000 was a peak of financial insanity, but it was also a peak of visionary clarity.
Clarity.
Yeah, people actually looked far into the future, recognized how much new technology humanity desperately needed, and had the audacity to try and build it. Today, we are trapped by our traumatized reactions to past mistakes.
This brings us to the core of the problem, the ideology of competition. We've internalized this belief that competing is inherently healthy, that it brings out the best in us. But if you want to build the future, you have to escape competition entirely.
We need to cleanly separate capitalism from competition because society uses those words interchangeably. Americans in particular just mythologize competition.
We really do. We credit it with driving our prosperity and saving us from Soviet-style breadlines.
Right. But mathematically and economically speaking, capitalism and competition are mutually exclusive opposites.
That sounds completely backwards.
Yeah.
I mean, how can capitalism and competition be opposite?
So what is the fundamental premise of a capitalist enterprise?
To make money, to accumulate capital.
Right, to make and keep a profit. Now, look at the economic model of perfect competition. Imagine a market where multiple firms sell the exact same undifferentiated product, a commodity.
How-
Because the products are identical, customers will buy strictly based on price. So if one firm is making a healthy profit, new competitors will see that margin, enter the market, increase the supply, and undercut the price to win customers.
Race to the bottom.
Exactly. Prices get driven down until the profit margin for every single firm hits exactly zero. In a state of perfect competition, a business is so consumed by a brutal fight for daily survival that it cannot possibly plan for a long-term future.
To make this real for you listening, let's look at the airline industry versus Google. The numbers here are just staggering. Let's look at 2012 data. The U.S. airline industry is massive. They generated $160 billion in revenue that year.
That's a lot of money.
It is. But because airlines sell an undifferentiated commodity, literally a seat on a tube flying from New York to L.A., they compete ruthlessly on price. So out of that $160 billion, the airlines collectively made a profit margin of 0.2%.
Wow.
That breaks down to roughly 37 cents of profit per passenger trip.
37 cents.
You cannot even buy a pack of gum at the airport terminal with the profit they make safely rocketing you across the continent.
Now compare that to Google in that exact same year. Google brought in $50 billion in revenue, less than the third of what the airlines made.
Okay.
But because Google doesn't have to fight a price war with 10 identical search engines, they kept 21% of those revenues as pure, unadulterated profit.
Which is huge.
That is a profit margin more than 100 times greater than the airline industry. The airlines are trapped in perfect competition. Google is a monopoly.
So the takeaway is clear here. If you want to create and actually capture lasting value, do not build an undifferentiated commodity business. You must be a monopoly.
Yes.
But here's where it gets confusing, because human psychology and corporate PR constantly muddy the waters. There is a universal bias at play. Both monopolists and competitors constantly lie about what they are.
Let's examine the monopoly lies first. Monopolists lie to protect themselves.
Because they have to, right?
Right. If you stand on a stage and brag about your impenetrable monopoly, you are painting a massive target on your back. You invite government audits, antitrust lawsuits, and public outrage. So monopolists deploy a specific narrative trick. They conceal their dominance by exaggerating the power of non-existent competition.
The mechanical trick they use is defining their market as the union of several large markets. They want to look like a tiny, vulnerable fish in a massive ocean. The Google example perfectly illustrates this. Is Google a monopoly? Well, they process roughly 68% of all internet searches. The word Google is literally a verb in the Oxford English Dictionary.
But if you listen to Google's executives, they will never frame themselves as a search engine monopoly. They will say, actually, we are an advertising company.
Why do they say that?
Because the global advertising market is nearly $500 billion. Suddenly, Google's search ad revenue looks like a modest slice of a giant pie. They have to, quote-unquote, compete with television networks, billboards, and magazines.
But even that isn't enough disguise for them.
Right, so they go even broader.
Google's PR machine frames them as a multifaceted technology company. They say, look at us, we do search, but we also build robotic cars, we make Android operating systems, we're experimenting with wearable tech.
It sounds so diverse.
But if you look at their actual financials from that era, 95% of their revenue came strictly from search advertising. Their consumer tech hardware was literally a rounding error.
Yeah.
But by defining their market as the entire $964 billion global consumer tech industry, Google can look regulators in the eye and say, we own less than 0.25% of this market. We're practically microscopic. Please don't regulate us.
It's a brilliant, highly effective sleight of hand. Now, non-monopolists, the companies trapped in perfect competition, they tell the exact opposite lie.
Which is funny when you think about it.
It's a psychological defense mechanism. They are terrified of admitting to themselves and their investors that they are in a brutal zero-margin fight for survival. So they claim they are in a league of their own. And the mechanical trick they use is the intersection of small markets to pretend they are unique.
They say, we're completely unique. There's absolutely no competition for what we do. The fatal temptation for a startup is to describe your market so narrowly that you dominate it by definition.
Right. There's a brilliant example of this. Let's say you decide to open a restaurant serving British food in Palo Alto, California. You tell your investors, nobody else is doing this. We are going to own the entire market.
But you've made a catastrophic error in defining the relevant market. You are assuming the market is British food in Palo Alto.
Which it isn't.
Exactly. The actual market is the entire Palo Alto restaurant industry. When a family decides to go out for dinner, they aren't choosing between your British restaurant and a non-existent rival British restaurant. They're choosing between you, the Italian place, the sushi bar, the burger joint, and just eating at home.
You haven't dominated a valuable market.
Yeah.
You've dominated a market of zero.
There's another hilarious example from the creative industries. A screenwriter pitches a movie to a studio. It's Jay-Z, starring in a cross between the movie Hackers and the movie Jaws. We've got a rap star joining a crew of elite teenage hackers to hunt down the great white shark that killed his friend.
Sounds terrible.
When the writer says, this has never been done before. There is no movie like this. Sure, you found the totally unique intersection of rap stars, hackers, and sharks, but you haven't found a business. You've created a bizarre vanity project.
If you lose sight of competitive reality and focus on trivial differentiating factors like genuinely believing your new Indian restaurant will crush the competition solely because of your great-grandmother's secret naan recipe, your business will not survive.
The market doesn't care about your recipe.
The competitive ecosystem is merciless. It pushes people toward ruthlessness or death. To keep margins positive, you pay your workers minimum wage, you squeeze every ounce of efficiency out of your supply chain, you might even put your own kids to work washing dishes just to save on labor.
Grueling.
Even at the absolute highest end of the industry, the pressure is lethal. A French chef with 3 Michelin stars tragically committed suicide because a competing dining guide threatened to downgrade his restaurant. Competition isn't a healthy sport. It is a brutal struggle for basic survival.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. Aren't monopolies inherently evil? We all grew up playing the board game Monopoly.
Sure.
The whole goal of the game is to buy up all the properties, jack up the rent, and force everyone else into bankruptcy, while you sit back and hoard cash. How can that possibly be the blueprint for a better future?
The distinction comes down to static versus dynamic worlds. In a static world, a world where the total pie of wealth never grows, like the real estate board in the game Monopoly, a monopolist is indeed just an evil rent collector.
Because they aren't adding anything.
Right. If the world never changes and you somehow corner the market on water or land, you are just extracting value from people without creating any new value yourself. But we do not live in a static world.
Thank goodness.
We live in a dynamic world where it is possible to invent new and better things. And this introduces the concept of the creative monopoly.
So a creative monopoly doesn't corner a finite market. It creates a brand new market that didn't exist before.
Exactly. Creative monopolists give customers more choices by adding entirely new categories of abundance to the world.
Like what?
Well, Apple's iOS ecosystem broke Microsoft's decades-long operating system dominance. Decades before that, Microsoft's software monopoly disrupted IBM's hardware monopoly. AT&T had a total monopoly on landline telephones, and now anyone can get a cheap, infinitely more powerful cell phone.
So they replace each other.
The history of human progress is literally a history of better creative monopoly businesses replacing stagnant incumbents.
And because a creative monopoly actually makes massive profits, it isn't forced into that ruthless fight for survival we talked about.
Precisely. Google's 21% profit margin means they can afford to treat their employees incredibly well. They can afford to care about their products and their impact on society.
They can think long term.
They can plan decades into the future, financing hugely ambitious research projects like self-driving cars or quantum computing that a firm locked in daily zero-margin competition could never afford to even dream of.
Okay, let's say I'm entirely convinced. I don't want to open a hyper-competitive burger joint. I want to build a creative monopoly, go from 0 to 1, and invent the future. What are the actual nuts and bolts? If I'm looking at a business idea, how do I know if it has the potential to become a monopoly?
While every monopoly is unique by definition, they generally share 4 distinct characteristics. Let's use them as a diagnostic checklist.
Okay, hit me.
First is proprietary technology. This is the most substantive advantage a company can have because it makes your product impossible to legally or practically replicate. Google's PageRank search algorithms are the classic example.
Right.
But the rule of thumb here is crucial. To establish a true monopoly, your proprietary tech must be at least 10 times better than its closest substitute.
Why 10 times? I mean, why isn't a 20% improvement enough?
Because of human inertia and switching costs. If your new software is only 20% faster than what a company currently uses, they will not go through the massive headache of retraining their entire staff to use it.
It's just not worth the effort.
The market will perceive it as a marginal, easily ignorable update. You have to be an order of magnitude better to actually force a behavioral change.
You can achieve that 10x improvement in a few ways, right? You can invent something completely new. If you invent a genuine cure for baldness, that is an infinite improvement over existing treatments, because existing treatments largely don't work.
Exactly.
Or you can radically improve an existing painful process.
PayPal is a perfect example of a 10x improvement on a process. Before PayPal, if you bought an item on eBay from a stranger, you had to write a physical paper check, put it in the mail, wait for it to travel across the country, and wait another week for the bank to clear it.
Which is crazy to think about now.
It was a miserable 10-day process. PayPal made the transaction instantaneous. That is easily a 10x improvement.
Amazon did it with inventory. When Jeff Bezos launched in 1995, he claimed to be Earth's largest bookstore. He could make that claim because he didn't hold physical inventory in retail stores.
Yeah.
He requested titles from wholesale suppliers on demand. He offered 10 times as many books as any physical Barnes & Noble store could physically hold on its shelves.
You can also achieve that 10x threshold through superior integrated design. Before 2010, tablet computing was a total nightmare. Microsoft and Nokia had tried to build them, but the hardware and software were disjointed, making them heavy, clunky, and just painful to
I
use.
remember those. They were awful.
Apple released the iPad with completely integrated hardware and software, improving the user experience by an order of magnitude. It went from a frustrating novelty to a highly useful daily tool.
So that's proprietary tech. What's the second characteristic?
Network effects. This is the phenomenon where a product becomes more useful to you as more people use it. Think of a telephone.
Okay.
If you are the only person on Earth with a telephone, it is completely useless. But as millions of people get telephones, the value of your phone skyrockets.
But there is a massive paradox here. If you need millions of users for the network to be valuable, how do you get your very first user?
This is exactly where most startups fail. To eventually get millions of users, you must start with a market that is exceptionally small. Your product has to be deeply valuable to its very first users when the network is tiny.
That makes sense.
Consider Mark Zuckerberg. He didn't launch Facebook for the entire world to use on day one. He launched it strictly for Harvard students. A network of just a few thousand Harvard students was highly engaging for those specific users.
Right, because they all knew each other.
If he had tried to build a network for everybody all at once, it would have been an empty ghost town and it would have failed.
There's a tragic historical counterexample to this, too. A 1960s company called Xanadu. They tried to build a massive two-way communication network for all computers, essentially a precursor to the internet.
Oh, I've heard of them.
Yeah, but their system required everyone to join at the exact same time for it to work. After 30 years of effort and millions of dollars, they folded right as the World Wide Web, which allowed for incremental growth, just took off.
Which brings us to the third characteristic, economies of scale. A monopoly business gets stronger and more profitable as it gets bigger.
Let's break down the mechanism behind this. It's about fixed costs versus marginal costs.
Exactly. The fixed costs of a software company, the engineering talent, the management, the office space, those are very high. But the marginal cost of producing one more copy of that software program is practically zero.
Right.
It costs the exact same to write the code whether you sell 1 copy or 1 million copies.
Compare that to a service business, like a local yoga studio. You can only fit maybe 20 people in a room. To scale up and serve more customers, you have to lease more commercial space, hire more instructors, pay higher utilities.
Your costs rise linearly with your revenue. Your profit margins stay flat and low.
Right.
A good startup has the potential for massive scale built into its foundational design. Twitter, for example, can serve 250 million users without fundamentally changing its core infrastructure costs.
And the final characteristic is branding. Creating a strong brand is a powerful way to claim a monopoly. Apple is the undisputed masterclass here.
Oh, without a doubt.
The sleek, minimalist design, the premium materials, the absolute control over the customer experience in the Apple Store, the aura of Steve Jobs. It all coalesces to create a perception that Apple is not just a tech company, but a category unto itself.
But the crucial lesson here is that you cannot build a monopoly on branding alone. There must be underlying substance.
Yes, Apple's brand is backed by proprietary hardware and software, massive economies of scale in their manufacturing supply chain, and powerful network effects from their app developer ecosystem.
Right, it's a whole package.
Contrast this with Yahoo's failed attempt to reinvent itself a decade ago under CEO Marissa Mayer. They desperately tried to make the company cool again. They redesigned the logo, acquired trendy companies like Tumblr, relied on Mayer's personal star power, and explicitly stated a strategy of people, then products, then traffic, then revenue.
But without a fundamentally 10x better product, the branding was just an empty shell. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in the late 90s, he didn't just tweak the logo. His very first move was slashing dozens of mediocre product lines to focus entirely on building a few 10x improvements.
So those are the 4 characteristics of a monopoly. How do you actually sequence the building process? The blueprint is incredibly counterintuitive. You start extremely small, monopolize a specific niche, and slowly expand to adjacent markets.
This goes against every instinct of an ambitious founder. You want to conquer the world immediately. But the strategy is to err on the side of starting too small.
Always.
Always. It is mathematically easier to dominate a small market than a large one. Let's look at Amazon's execution. Jeff Bezos' ultimate grand vision was the everything store. He wanted to dominate all of online retail.
Right, but he didn't start by selling everything. He started by selling only books.
What?
Because books are essentially a commodity. They were roughly the same shape, they're easy to ship, they don't spoil, and there are millions of titles.
Hmm.
By aggregating all the books in the world into one digital catalog, he created a 10x improvement for anyone wanting a rare book or living far from a major bookstore. He monopolized that specific niche.
And once he owned the book market, he didn't just randomly jump to selling auto parts or fresh groceries. He expanded to the most logically similar adjacent markets: CDs, videos, and software.
It was methodical.
Very. He slowly, methodically added categories until Amazon actually became the everything store. The same goes for eBay. They didn't start as a general marketplace. They started by catering to small-time hobbyists, creating a monopoly in highly distinct rare items like Beanie Babies and antique coins before expanding.
Let me stop you right there because I want to address the biggest buzzword in all of business media: disruption. Isn't the whole goal of a startup to be a disruptor, to be the insurgent rebel alliance fighting the big, slow corporate empire?
Actually, that is a highly dangerous way to think about it. The disruption mindset is a trap.
Really?
Yes, viewing yourself as an insurgent fighting dark corporate forces makes you obsessed with the old guard. If your entire company's identity and product roadmap are based on opposing an existing firm, you aren't creating something completely new.
You're just reacting.
Exactly. You are just defining yourself by your competitor. You are still trapped in the ideology of competition.
Disruption attracts a lot of media attention, but it also attracts massive trouble. The classic tragic example is Napster. Even the name Napster implies trouble and theft.
Right.
In 1999, the teenage founders aggressively and publicly challenged the incredibly powerful recording industry.
Yeah.
They actively picked a fight. They made the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah.
And a year and a half later, they were crushed in bankruptcy court. It was a negative-sum war.
Now, compare Napster's disruptive war to PayPal's approach. You can argue PayPal was disruptive to the banking industry, but they didn't explicitly pick a direct fight with Visa or MasterCard.
No, they didn't.
They took some transaction volume away from Visa for online payments, yes, but overall, PayPal drastically expanded the total pie of online commerce. They ended up driving far more total transaction volume through Visa networks than they ever took away. You want to avoid direct competition as much as possible.
This fundamentally changes how we view first-mover advantage. We are all taught that you have to be the first to market to win.
Being first is just a tactic. What really matters is being the last mover. Being the first mover is utterly useless if someone else comes along, builds a slightly better product, unseats you, and captures all the future cash flows.
You want to make the last great technological development in a specific market and then enjoy decades of monopoly profits without anyone threatening you.
Exactly. And the way to do that is to study the end game from the very beginning. As the great chess grandmaster Jose Raul Capablanca said, you must study the end game before everything else.
Okay, we've outlined what to build a 0-to-1 creative monopoly and how to sequence it by starting small. But here is the friction point. You cannot meticulously sequence a monopoly or execute a 10-year plan if you fundamentally believe the future is just a random roll of the dice.
The way you view the future dictates what you are capable of building.
Which brings us to a fascinating psychological framework. You can map society's view of the future on a grid with two axes. Do you expect the future to be definite or indefinite? And do you expect it to be optimistic or pessimistic? This creates 4 quadrants that explain so much about human behavior.
This framework is profound. Let's explore these 4 quadrants, starting with quadrant 1, definite optimism. This is the belief that the future will definitely be better than the present, and you know exactly how to plan and build it.
This was the defining mindset of America during the 1950s and 60s.
It was an era of colossal, intelligently designed progress. Look at the infrastructure. The Empire State Building was planned and constructed in just over a year, right in the middle of the Great Depression. The Golden Gate Bridge took only 4 years.
That's insane speed.
The interstate highway system completely reshaped the continent. And the ultimate example, the Apollo program put 12 men on the moon in less than a decade. There was a widespread societal belief that with careful engineering, rigorous math, and grand plans, humanity could shape a magnificent future.
Then you have quadrant 2, definite pessimism. This is the belief that the future can be known and predicted, but it's going to be incredibly bleak. So you must prepare for winter. The prime modern example here is China.
When we in the West look at China's economy growing at 8 to 10% a year, we assume they must be incredibly confident and happy. But that's our Western optimism projecting onto them.
So how do they see it?
From the perspective of China's leadership, that economic growth cannot come fast enough. They are acutely, terrifyingly aware of the massive demographic challenges of their aging population and their severe lack of natural resources. They are the only country on Earth terrified that they won't catch up in time. They are building relentlessly, not out of joyful exploration, but to brace for a hard, inevitable decline.
Quadrant 3 is indefinite pessimism. You know things are going to get worse, but you have no idea how, why, or when. So you essentially just give up. Modern Europe often falls into this category.
It's characterized by slow bureaucratic drift. Nobody is really in charge. There's no grand vision for the future of the continent. Governments just react to financial or social crises as they happen, hoping things don't deteriorate too quickly.
It's a very reactive mindset.
The logic is if the inevitable decline is coming and we can't stop it, we might as well eat well, drink good wine, and go on a 6-week vacation.
And finally, quadrant 4. This is the most crucial one because this is where America has been deeply stuck since roughly 1982, indefinite optimism. This is the ingrained belief that the future will definitely be better, but we have absolutely no idea how it will happen, so we don't make any concrete plans.
This mindset explains the core dysfunction of modern American capitalism. If you are an indefinite optimist, you fully expect to profit from the future, but you see no reason to design it. Instead of working for a decade to engineer a fundamentally new 0-to-1 product, indefinite optimists just shuffle and rearrange things that already exist.
Which explains a lot about career choices.
Exactly. This is exactly why our brightest, most capable college graduates flock to Wall Street, corporate law, or management consulting.
Think about the mechanics of those jobs. Investment bankers make millions of dollars by taking the capital structures of existing decades-old companies and rearranging them. Corporate lawyers spend their lives resolving complex disputes over old things. Private equity firms buy old businesses and squeeze marginal efficiencies out of them. Modern finance is the absolute epitome of indefinite thinking.
Because the fundamental tenet of modern finance is that the market is a random walk. Financial theory dictates that you cannot know anything specific about the future of any individual company. So the supreme rule of investing is extreme diversification. You build a massive portfolio of options and hope the overall market trends upward.
We see this indefinite drift in politics, too. We no longer have leaders coordinating massive national projects like atomic weaponry or lunar exploration.
Yeah.
We have politicians whose platforms are perfectly algorithmically tailored by daily polling to match pre-existing public opinion.
Right, the vision is gone.
The government's primary function has shifted from building the future to merely providing insurance, administering Medicare and Social Security. We are endlessly tracking daily poll numbers instead of envisioning what the country must look like in 20 years.
The contrast between definite and indefinite thinking is sharpest when you look at how different industries do research and development. Let's compare software to biotechnology. Software engineering operates with definite thinking. Code is determinate. If you write a specific line of code, the machine performs a specific action. You can engineer a specific outcome.
But modern biotech has fully adopted indefinite thinking.
Yes. The numbers in biotech are staggering. We have Moore's law in computing where things get exponentially better and cheaper. But the data reveals that biotech suffers from Eroom's law, which is Moore's law spelled backward.
Eroom's law.
Eroom's law states that the number of new drugs approved per $1 billion spent on R&D has literally halved every 9 years since 1950.
Wow. And why is that?
Because pharmaceutical researchers have largely abandoned definite targeted engineering. Instead, they rely on randomly screening millions of chemical compounds against uncontrollable biological organisms, hoping they accidentally stumble upon something that works.
It's agnostic experimentation.
It's incredibly expensive, incredibly slow, and wildly inefficient. If you treat scientific discovery like a Darwinian lottery ticket, you get Eroom's law.
Which brings us to the most brutal mathematical reality of building the future. The power law. Einstein supposedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. Even if he never actually said it, the underlying message is vital. Never underestimate the sheer force of exponential growth. And in the world of venture capital, the power law dictates absolutely everything.
Venture capitalists invest in early-stage startups knowing most will fail. But they must follow a terrifying mathematical rule. They can only invest in a company if that specific company has the potential to return the value of the entire venture fund.
Meaning one company has to pay for all the losers.
Because the failure rate is so high, the few companies that do succeed must succeed on a cosmic monopolistic scale to make up for all the losses.
The math on this breaks your brain. Let's look at Andreessen Horowitz, one of the top VC firms. In 2010, they invested $250,000 into a tiny startup called Instagram. 2 years later, Facebook buys Instagram, and Andreessen nets $78 million. That is a 312x return on their money. To any normal person, that sounds like an unbelievable grand slam success.
But look at the denominator. Andreessen Horowitz had a $1.5 billion fund. Even with a 312x return, that $78 million is just a drop in the bucket. They would need to find 19 Instagrams, 19 once-in-a-generation cultural phenomenons just to break even on their fund if they only wrote checks that size.
That's why venture capitalists have to aggressively back their biggest winners with massive amounts of capital. They live and die by the power law.
But this philosophy flies in the face of everything we are taught about personal finance and career planning.
Completely.
From day one, we are told to diversify. Don't put your eggs in one basket. Major in something broad. Buy a totally diversified index fund.
Diversification is the ultimate indefinite coping mechanism. It assumes you can't know the future, so you spread your bets perfectly thin to avoid total ruin. But the power law doesn't just govern venture capital, it governs your life and your career. You are making a major investment just by deciding where to spend your 40 hours a week.
So what's the career takeaway?
You are financially and practically better off owning 0.01% of a massive, definite monopoly like Google than owning 100% of a failed, undifferentiated startup. The power law dictates that the differences between companies absolutely dwarf the differences in roles inside companies.
As Thiel says, you are not a lottery ticket. You have agency. You can develop definite mastery over a small and important part of the world, but you have to reject the tyranny of chance and actively design your future.
But what happens when smart people with billions of dollars genuinely believe the indefinite competitive ideology is right? What happens when an entire industry ignores the power law and blindly marches into a massive, undifferentiated market? We don't have to guess. We just have to look at the crater left by the 2000s clean tech bubble.
This is our case study in failure. And it is a perfect illustration of everything we've talked about going wrong. In the early 2000s, the macroeconomic writing was on the wall. Smog in Beijing was choking the city. Bangladesh had arsenic in its wells. The scientific consensus on global warming was heartening.
The world desperately needed clean technology.
Right. So investors poured more than $50 billion into thousands of clean tech startups. It was hailed as the definitive next big thing.
John Doerr, one of the most famous and successful investors in history, literally declared that green is the new red, white, and blue. He was whipping up a frenzy, and he boasted that while internet markets were measured in the billions, energy markets were in the trillions.
And based on everything we've just discussed, we know that was the fatal flaw. Doerr and these entrepreneurs thought entering a trillion-dollar market was a wonderful opportunity.
But it isn't.
No, a trillion-dollar market just means $1 trillion worth of bloody, ruthless, margin-destroying competition. Any great business has to have good answers to 7 fundamental questions. The clean tech companies struck out on almost all of them. Let's walk through the anatomy of this disaster using the 7 questions.
Question 1 is the engineering question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you create breakthrough technology instead of incremental improvements? Remember the 10x rule. Most clean tech companies were offering maybe a 10% or 20% improvement in solar cell efficiency. That wasn't enough to force massive utility companies to change their entire infrastructure.
Question 2 is the timing question. Is now the right time to start this particular business? Cleantech CEOs loved comparing themselves to the microprocessor industry of the 1970s, promising rapid exponential gains. But that historical analogy was entirely false. Silicon solar cells were invented way back in 1954 by Bell Labs. Their efficiency had improved incredibly slowly and linearly over 50 years, from 6% to maybe 25%. There was no sudden engineering breakthrough in the mid-2000s to suggest an exponential leap was imminent. They entered a slow-moving market without a definite plan.
Question 3 is the monopoly question. Are you starting with a big share of a small market? Absolutely not. Let's look at the math of a solar manufacturer called Mia Soleil. Their CEO testified to Congress, bragging that his company was one of several strong players in the thin-film solar space.
Let me stop you right there. One of several is the exact phrase you never want to hear. It means you are trapped in competition.
Right. And then he predicted they would soon be the largest producer of thin film. Let's break down the delusion here. Let's say you install 100 megawatts of solar panels. U.S. capacity at the time was roughly 950 megawatts. You look at a spreadsheet and think, great, I own over 10% of the market.
But that's the wrong market.
It's exactly. The relevant market isn't just the United States. Solar panels are a global commodity. The global market was 18 gigawatts. Suddenly, your 100 megawatts means you own less than 1% of the market. You are a tiny microscopic fish in an ocean of vicious zero-margin competition. Mia Soleil was eventually sold for hundreds of millions of dollars less than investors had put into it.
Question 4 is the people question. Do you have the right team? Cleantech was notoriously run by non-technical executives in suits who were more skilled at lobbying the government for subsidies than engineering actual products.
It was a mess.
Question 5 is distribution. Do you have a way to not just create, but deliver your product?
The poster child for failing the distribution question was an incredibly hyped Israeli startup called Better Place. They raised and spent over $800 million to build electric cars with swappable battery packs and a massive network of changing stations.
Their mission was noble to eliminate range anxiety and lessen dependence on polluting oil, but they completely ignored the friction of distribution. They only ever sold about 1,000 cars before going completely bankrupt.
Why did they fail so badly?
Because the cars were incredibly confusing and difficult for customers to actually buy and use. They assumed the green virtue of the product would magically sell itself.
Question 6 is the durability question. Will your market position be defensible 10 and 20 years into the future? Clean tech companies assumed fossil fuels would inevitably get more expensive. But then the fracking revolution happened, natural gas prices plummeted, and the clean tech economic models imploded.
And the final question, question 7, is the secret question. Have you identified a unique opportunity that others don't see? Clean tech wasn't a secret. It was the most public consensus-driven trend in the world. When everyone agrees a market is the next big thing, the opportunity has already vanished into competition.
The entire industry collapsed, but there was one massive, glaring exception: Tesla. Tesla succeeded precisely because they had specific, definite 10x answers to all 7 questions. They proved that green energy wasn't inherently a bad idea. It was the indefinite, competitive, one-to-one way people approached it that caused the disaster.
Which leads us to a fundamental societal anxiety about the 0-to-1 technologies that do succeed. If we are supposed to build definite, radically advanced technologies, a massive fear looms over the public. Will these incredibly powerful new machines just replace human beings entirely?
Yeah, the famous quote is, "Software is eating the world." Everyone is terrified that AI and robotics will take all the jobs. It feels like a replay of the globalization fears from the 90s. But instead of jobs going to a factory in Mexico, they're going to a server farm in the cloud.
But that fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of basic economics. We have to draw a sharp, distinct line between substitution and complementarity.
Okay, let's break that down.
Globalization is substitution. When you have free trade, human workers in different countries can substitute for each other. A factory worker in Ohio can be replaced by a factory worker in Shenzhen. And more importantly, humans across the globe compete for the exact same finite resources. American consumers and Chinese oligarchs both want the same gasoline, the same food, the same luxury real estate.
But technology is complementarity. Computers are fundamentally alien to humans. We possess intentionality, we form long-term plans, we understand complex social context, and we make nuanced judgments. Computers are utterly terrible at basic judgment, but they excel at processing massive amounts of data efficiently.
And crucially, computers do not demand resources. They don't want beachfront villas. They don't want to eat steak. They don't want crystal champagne. They just need a little electricity and a cold room. When we use computers, we gain a hyper-specialized trading partner without having to compete with it for resources. Computers are tools, not rivals.
The mechanics of this are beautifully illustrated by another story from the early days of PayPal. In mid-2000, PayPal was growing exponentially, but they were facing an existential crisis. They were literally losing $10 million a month to credit card fraud. $10 million a month. The organized crime fraudsters were eating them alive.
They faced a massive structural problem. They couldn't solve the fraud with just human analysts, because humans are far too slow to manually review thousands of rapid-fire transactions a minute. The backlog would paralyze the network. But they also couldn't solve it strictly with machine learning algorithms.
Why not? Algorithms are fast.
Because the human fraudsters were adaptive. The moment PayPal updated its algorithms to catch a certain type of fraud, the human criminals would figure out the new rules and immediately adapt their tactics to bypass the code.
So they created a hybrid, a man-machine symbiosis. They built a system called Igor, named after a prolific Russian fraudster. They used the massive processing power of the algorithm to sift through millions of transactions and flag the most suspicious patterns.
Right.
Then they presented those flagged transactions on a clean user interface for human analysts to make the final, nuanced judgment call. It worked perfectly. It saved the company.
And that profound realization that combining immense machine processing power with human intentionality is the ultimate tool birthed Palantir. The founders took that hybrid approach to the FBI and the CIA to track global terrorist networks and complex financial fraud.
The machines crunch the data, the humans make the call.
Exactly. The computers crunch the divergent, massive data sources, phone records, bank transfers, flight logs, and the human analysts extract the insight to make the tactical decision. Better technology in law, medicine, or intelligence doesn't replace professionals. It empowers them to do vastly more.
To find these specific 0-to-1 opportunities where man and machine complement each other, you have to hunt for secrets.
A secret is a truth that is either actively forbidden by society or simply ignored. Modern society tends to believe that all the hard problems have been solved, that there are no blank spaces left on the map to explore. We're taught incrementalism in school, and the sheer scale of globalization makes us feel like the world is too crowded for a single person to discover something genuinely unique.
But secrets exist everywhere, if you know how to look. Look at Airbnb and Uber. Before they came along, everyone assumed the hotel and taxi markets were completely mapped, regulated, and efficient.
But the founders of those companies saw a massive, untapped supply, millions of empty bedrooms, and empty car seats where everyone else saw absolutely nothing. They believed in a secret hidden in plain sight.
But even if you find a brilliant secret and you engineer a revolutionary product, we have to circle back to dogma number 4. A great product does not sell itself.
Right. There is a rule known as Thiel's Law. A startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed. And a core part of that foundation is the mechanics of distribution. If you invent a miracle but haven't engineered a way to sell it profitably, you don't have a business, you have a science project, you have to understand the fundamental math of sales. Your customer lifetime value, or CLV, must be higher than your customer acquisition cost, or CAC.
Let's explain those mechanics. CAC is the toll booth you have to pay just to get a customer through the door. It's the money you spend on marketing, ads, and salespeople. CLV is the total amount of profit that customer will generate for you over the course of their relationship with your company. If it costs you $500 in Google ads to acquire a customer, but they only buy a $100 product, you are bleeding to death with every sale.
The methods of distribution you choose are entirely dictated by the price of your product.
Right.
If you sell $1 million software system to governments or massive corporations, you can't use Facebook ads. You need complex, high-touch human sales teams who take executives out to expensive dinners and negotiate for months. But what if you sell $100 eyeglasses?
That's the Warby Parker example. A $100 product simply doesn't generate enough CLV to justify paying a personal salesperson to talk to every customer. But $100 is also too much friction for a product to naturally go viral on the internet without any marketing. You are stuck in the middle.
So what do they do?
So Warby Parker used traditional TV ads. They recognized that they needed a great big megaphone to reach millions of people cheaply to get their CAC low enough to turn a profit.
But startups have to be incredibly careful. You can't just blindly copy the big company's PR stunts and hope for the best. PR requires a surgical understanding of your specific audience.
Oh man, the PayPal Star Trek failure is the ultimate cautionary tale here. They wanted to launch a new software feature to journalists, so they hired James Doohan, the actor who played Scotty, the chief engineer on Star Trek, to be their official spokesman. The internal logic was, we're nerds, the tech journalists are nerds, Scotty is the engineer who beams things, it's perfect. I've beamed people up, now I beam money.
It completely flopped. They failed to understand the psychology of their audience. The journalists didn't care about the clever engineering joke. Later on, Priceline hired William Shatner, Captain Kirk, and it was a massive, historic success.
Because Kirk was the showboat.
Right. He was the leader who knew how to sell an adventure. But Priceline was already a major player with a massive marketing budget. Startups have to be ruthlessly precise with their distribution, not just throw money at gimmicks. Look around your company. If you don't see any salespeople, you are the salesperson.
We have covered an absolute mountain of ground today. Let's bring this all together. We started with the premise that progress is not inevitable. To actually build the future, you must abandon the comfort and safety of one-to-one copying. You have to reject the destructive dogma that competition is a healthy sport, and instead strive to build a creative monopoly that adds abundance to the world. You need a definite, intelligently designed plan, not just indefinite iteration. And you have to look for hidden secrets where man and machine complement each other.
Which brings us to a final philosophical framework from the philosopher Nick Bostrom. When we look at the extremely distant future of humanity, there are really only four possible macroscopic patterns. The first is what the ancients believed: endless cycles of prosperity and ruin over and over again.
The second is a stagnant plateau. The whole world globalizes, everyone catches up to the exact same standard of living, and we just sort of level off indefinitely. But as we discussed with the environmental math, a global plateau of intense resource competition with old technology is mathematically unsustainable.
Which leads to the third outcome: total extinction. The competition for scarce resources without new technology erupts into global conflict, and human civilization collapses completely.
That leaves only the fourth scenario, the singularity.
This is the scenario where we intentionally engineer new technologies so powerful that they transcend our current limits of understanding. We escape scarcity. We escape the brute, zero-margin struggle for survival. But the crucial takeaway from everything we've discussed today is that this future will not happen on its own.
We face a stark choice today between nothing and something. The future is not a lottery ticket. You just sit back and wait to scratch off. Every important moment in business and in life happens only exactly once. The next Bill Gates will not build an operating system. The next Mark Zuckerberg won't create a social network. The universe, the planet, and this very moment you are living in is completely singular.
It is entirely up to us.
We started this deep dive talking about the expectation of a clean formula for success. But there's one thing we've learned, is that the actual blueprint for the future isn't a copy of someone else's floor plan. It's a blank page. The future requires you to look closely at the world, find a secret no one else sees, and boldly design something entirely new from 0 to 1. So as you go back to your desk, your lab, or your life today, we leave you with one final question to mull over. What 0 to 1 miracle are you going to build?